Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Tina, soy una de las intérpretes. Para cualquier persona que tenga necesidad de tener la conversación o el programa traducido, podemos usar el aparato que se encuentra en la mesa. Lo conecta y se lo pone en el oído y ahí va a tener la traducción directamente desde mí o desde Jessica, que va a estar aquí también interpretando. El aparato es nuevo para mí también.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It will be simultaneously interpreted. Okay. Can you hear good? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Native and Indigenous people who have lived and continue to live on the land we gather upon. These lands were originally inhabited by the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Otoe, Missouri, Santee, Dakota Sioux, Kansas, Iowa, Cheyenne, and Ho-Chunk people. We take this time to acknowledge the past, present, and future of Indigenous people and to recognize the ever-present systemic inequities stemming directly from past wrongdoings and strive to commit ourselves indefinitely to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice for all peoples. We do have a couple of Native and Indigenous partners we would like to connect you with. We will send that in a follow-up email, but we work directly with Bluebird Cultural Initiative and NACPOMA to find ways to connect with the local community and support locally. And we'll send that information in a follow-up, but please find local organizations. So welcome tonight to our Omaha Table Talk Beyond Borders, Understanding the Impact of Immigration Policy. OTT was originally created in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities. And in 2012, Inclusive Communities acquired it and shifted it to a larger public conversation over comfort food. We have a few great partners out in Nebraska for QTT, NACPOMA for Native Table Talks, and the Asian American Pacific Island Leadership Alliance called the AAPI Table Talk. So this is a really great program, and we're excited you are all here tonight. I want to thank our sponsors for this event, Lozier Foundation. So thank you much for helping make this possible tonight. I also wanted to thank our caterer, Casa Real Tamales. Thank you so much for the delicious food. How was the food tonight, everybody? Delicious. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out, Maria, and providing us with a delicious meal. I also want to introduce our ASL interpreters. We have Summer and Victoria doing ASL interpretation, and you can turn on closed captions on Zoom to see the closed captioning of this talk tonight. And then also, of course, Tina and Jessica from World Speaks and Arturo in the back doing our simultaneous Spanish interpretation. If you need Spanish interpretation online, please do message Jennifer, and she will make sure that you are connected online with our Spanish interpreter. So look for Jennifer in the Zoom chat. I also want to thank CIRA and Nebraska Appleseed. So CIRA is a Center for Immigrant and Refugee Advancement, newly branded from the Immigrant Legal Center, and also Nebraska Appleseed and the Omaha Police Department for joining us here tonight as our partners for this event. And there's some information over here on the tables for you to find out more about those organizations. Before I introduce the panel or let them introduce themselves, the final note is that, of course, we have live interpretation happening. So when you do have the microphone where you're speaking, please make sure you're speaking slowly and clearly to make sure it is easy for the interpreters to interpret. And I have just been informed that I am speaking too quickly. So if you've been listening intently, you know that however I've been speaking is too fast. So speak slower than me. I was on the debate team, so fast talk was a premium because we were timed. So I apologize. Okay, I think that is all I need to say other than thank you to our amazing volunteers. If you're a volunteer tonight helping facilitate, can you please raise your hand? Thank you so much to our amazing volunteers tonight. Once we turn it over to the panel, they'll talk for about 35 minutes, and then we'll hand it back to you all in the room with our amazing table facilitators to have a conversation about what you heard, what you learned, and then we'll share in the large group what you talked about. And if there's time for any questions and questions for the panel. We'll take those at the end. But I think without further ado, I'll hand it over to Astrid, who is our amazing moderator tonight.
This on? Great. Good evening. I am Astrid Munn. I am an attorney at the Center for Immigrant and Refugee Advancement. And tonight we are discussing the topic of immigration and public safety. And we're talking about it right now because we are on the brink of a major general election where immigration policy figures heavily into the candidates' platforms. And even though we're in the interior United States, I think we're the only state where we're always, in no matter what direction, 3 states away from the ocean. Many candidates running for public office in our districts are nevertheless using imagery from the US border to stoke fear and imply that immigrants will bring crime to our communities if we vote a particular way. We are not here to talk about that imagery or those ads. We are here to take a break from that sensational fear-mongering, and we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to talk about what exactly our immigration policies are and who exactly is carrying them out, and how do those policies affect public safety and our sense of community here in Nebraska? So without further ado, I'm going to have the panelists each introduce themselves and identify the agency they're with, and with all of that intro, to answer the following question. What are 1 or 2 things you wish your community understood better about immigration and the work you do? The mic is near Ruby, so we'll start with you.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby Méndez López. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for Nebraska Appleseed. It is a multi-issue nonprofit. We work statewide, and we use 3 core tactics in our work: community organizing, legal action, and public policy. I am a community organizer in our Immigrants and Communities program, and I'm excited to be here tonight. One thing I think I always want, especially our local communities, to remember about immigration is that it has been nearly 40 years since Congress has meaningfully updated our immigration policy. This continues, has always, and will continue to cause harm and uncertainty for a lot of our local communities, and does not benefit anyone here or in our country.
Thank you. My name's Anna Deal. I'm the legal director at Sierra, Center for Immigrant and Refugee Advancement. I think I need to slow down. We are a nonprofit law firm and refugee resettlement agency. We provide resettlement, direct legal representation, and social work services to immigrants and refugees across Nebraska. Our immigration department represents a lot of undocumented folks, a lot of children, a lot of victims of crimes that occurred in the US, seeking immigration benefits based on that victimization. And a couple things that I wish that people understood about immigration. First, that immigration makes our communities and our country stronger. And Nebraska in particular really needs more, not fewer immigrants. We have a severe workforce shortage with 50 to 100,000 vacant jobs at any given time. We have a lot of small towns that will or would have withered but for migration from abroad. And immigrants really do enrich our communities. They start businesses at a higher rate than native-born Americans. They commit crime at a lower rate than native-born Americans. And they provide really critical services that grow and strengthen our economy and create new opportunities for all of us.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jeremy Christensen. I'm a captain with the Omaha Police Department. I oversee the criminal investigation section, which includes units such as the homicide unit, robbery unit, our non-fatal assault unit, property crimes units, and things of that nature. I've been on the job for 24 years now. Seems like an eternity, and sometimes it seems like yesterday. Formerly worked in South Omaha in the gang unit as a sergeant down here, so really enjoyed my time there. I think the one thing from, and obviously I'm just speaking from my perspective, not on the department perspective, but I think a lot of my colleagues would echo this, is we want everybody in the community to feel safe. And we don't want to be viewed as the enemy. You know, there's a lot of misconceptions about how the Omaha Police Department interacts with not only the community, but with our federal partners. So I think the big thing is just to, the one thing I wish I knew people knew about was, you know, we're here for the safety and prosperity of everybody.
Hold up, you still have the mic. I'm going to ask you more questions. I know you're in the hot seat. So can you build upon that? Can you tell a little, talk to us a little bit about, you know, what interaction, if any, local law enforcement has with federal immigration enforcement? Can you speak to that?
Sure. So the biggest thing I think people need to understand is that there is a very strong distinction between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement. The Omaha Police Department does not enforce federal law. Never have, probably never will, that I can foresee. So we, as city police officers, do not enforce any type of immigration laws. We do not, to my knowledge, I can't think of a time we've ever assisted any federal partners in, you know, apprehending people with federal warrants that are immigration or, you know, legal status based. The only time, I mean, we do have good working relationships with our federal partners, but as far as the enforcement of immigration laws, that enforcement and those activities are left up to the federal government, and we do not conduct those as part of the Omaha Police Department. There are times when we will share information more from an investigative or biographical standpoint, but very, very rarely do we have anything to do, and I would almost go so far as to say we just don't have anything to do with enforcing the immigration laws from the federal government.
So people can take that to understand that if they need to report a crime, they should not fear that their immigration status will factor into their ability to report.
Absolutely. So as I previously stated, I've been doing this job for 24 years, and I can't ever remember a time, because it's never happened, where I've asked somebody their immigration status. It really has no bearing on local crimes as far as how we investigate them. We've unfortunately had immigrants who have been victimized, and you know, the science and research tells us that crimes do go underreported in immigrant communities. So it's hard to address crime concerns when we don't even know they're occurring. You know, again, we want everybody to feel safe, and we want everybody to prosper. and to have, good and meaningful, safe lives.
Thank you so much, Captain. That wasn't so bad, was it?
Not yet, but the night is young.
So,
Guard is still up.
I'm going to pass it over to Anna. So even though local law enforcement here in Omaha has no role in enforcing federal immigration law, why are immigrants in our communities nevertheless fearful of local government and institutions?
Yeah, so there's a good deal of confusion, particularly I think among more recently arrived immigrants and refugees about the various roles and responsibilities of local law enforcement and our state court system versus immigration enforcement and the removal system. And one of the things that has led to produce some of this confusion is that there are several programs where ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, partners with local law enforcement or local jails, typically, to help them enforce immigration laws. One of these is called Secure Communities, and it's actually in place in every jurisdiction in the US, I found in preparing for this, but it just means that when an individual is fingerprinted at booking, when they're arrested, that fingerprinting is shared with the FBI, and the FBI then shares that information with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That checks it against their databases. And so if the checks reveal that a person is unlawfully present in the US, ICE may choose to take enforcement action. And that may look like issuing what's called a detainer, an immigration detainer, or an ICE hold, which is where ICE requests that a local jail or prison hold someone beyond the time when they would otherwise be released from jail or state custody so that ICE can pick them up or transfer them to ICE custody. So ICE detainers raise serious constitutional concerns because they are essentially a seizure or detention without requiring proof of probable cause to believe that the person has committed a crime. So because of that, a lot of jurisdictions don't honor them. Douglas County does not honor detainer requests. However, I will say anecdotally, it does seem that there are other information sharing mechanisms. I think most likely the Secure Communities program that allows fingerprinting to be shared with the federal government and then passed on to ICE. So generally, if somebody is leaving state custody, like after serving a sentence, ICE is aware that there's a non-citizen leaving custody and can exercise the opportunity to take custody. We don't see it locally, I would say, after like release from booking, typically on a minor offense. And I think that does happen in some jurisdictions, but not here. Real briefly, one other partnership that folks may be aware of are called 287G agreements. 287G comes from the section of the statute that provides the authority for these, but this is a program where ICE delegates certain immigration enforcement functions to state or local police. And these require an agreement between the local law enforcement agency and ICE, and there's only one jurisdiction in Nebraska currently that has a 287G agreement, and that is Dakota County up in South Sioux City. But these allow local officers to interview individuals to determine their immigration status, to check immigration databases, to issue the detainers that I mentioned, so to take a number of actions that typically ICE officers would only be able to take.
Thank you, Anna. And I'm going to hand it over to Ruby now. So whereas Captain Christensen, Anna, and I, we're all here in the oasis that is Omaha, and we understand that there is no interaction between local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement. Is that the case necessarily across the state? That's one part of the question. And how are things playing out in greater Nebraska, because you're going out there and in the trenches? Can you speak a little to the work you're doing across the state and what you're seeing in terms of immigration policies impact on our communities? I realize that was a lot.
Yeah, so like Anna said, the only county in Nebraska that does do federal enforcement is, well, 287G enforcement is Dakota County, which is their largest city is South Sioux City. So if you've ever been there, that would be around that area. I think when we're talking about greater Nebraska, there is a general fear and lack of information. There just isn't as many resources available to rural communities as there is here in the greater Omaha area or in the Lincoln area even, meaning that we don't have a lot of partners, a lot of local organizations like Nebraska Appleseed or the Center for Immigrant and Refugee Advancement that are trying to provide services or information to our community members. And they are often smaller communities with smaller concentrations of immigrant community members, meaning sometimes we see a lot of isolation in those communities, only one family living in a community, being the only immigrant family in that town. And when the only information you're receiving is maybe the news or what you're seeing on social media, and there is a lot of false information, mis and disinformation happening online, it can often cause fear among our communities and especially among community members. And oftentimes we see that that fear comes from the mis and disinformation we see online, and that they're acting based on that information. So they are often not participating in their community based on that information. They are often scared to look for resources because they heard they could get in trouble for that. And it causes this disconnect between our immigrant community members and the rest of their community.
I want you to elaborate on that. I mean, why should Nebraskans, native born or otherwise, why should Nebraskans care about how safe immigrants feel in our communities? Can you speak a little to the ripple effect on society when members of our community live in fear?
Yeah, I think first, these are our neighbors, our friends, our family, our coworkers, and they should be a part of our community and participate fully as much as the rest of us. And I think also that these ripple effects do end up affecting everyone in the community. I think of an example of in Lexington, Nebraska, there's a large Somali population. And when they built a new church in Lexington, they shared a parking lot with another local business. And in the community that this where the Somali community came from, they didn't have a lot of parking regulations. So they didn't know that parking lines needed to be followed. And the local Lexington police kept giving out parking violations. And community members were becoming really frustrated with the Somali community members because they kept violating these parking rules that we know are obvious and we know need to be followed, but our Somali neighbors were not aware of that, and kept getting parking violations. And it wasn't until someone had a conversation with them that they figured out that they just never knew that that was a law or a rule that needed to be followed. And that's a really small example of what can happen when we're not having conversations with our community members. But the ripple effects can be much deeper. We see a lot of isolation, we see a lot of fear. And like the police chief was saying earlier, a lot of underreporting of crimes. Sorry, not chief, captain. Sorry. A lot of underreporting of crimes that can be really harmful to the entire community if not addressed.
And thanks. And I want to hear more examples. So I want to turn it over to Anna. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and what you've seen in terms of how federal and state immigration policies can affect the daily lives of immigrants?
Yeah, so I've been practicing immigration law since 2013. So I've been through a few different presidential administrations. And immigration enforcement policy has fluctuated pretty significantly over my career. Under the Obama administration, particularly in the last couple years of the Obama administration, there were enforcement priorities announced that prioritized recent border crossers, individuals convicted of significant crimes, those with final removal orders. And then in January 2017, immediately when Trump took office, there were new enforcement priorities announced. And those priorities effectively made anyone and everyone of equal priority. The guidance listed a bunch of categories and then said anyone who is unlawfully present in the United States. So anyone who could not prove that they had status in the US could and should be pursued for deportation under these priorities. So this led to ICE officials having really broad discretion to decide how they wanted to enforce the law, who they wanted to pursue. It's not possible to pursue everyone, right? We don't have resources to pursue 11 million or more people for deportation, so they necessarily have to allocate resources, and there was a lot of variation in how different offices and even individual officers went about doing that. Collateral arrests became commonplace, so that's when ICE was pursuing someone for whom they had an administrative warrant to arrest, but they would pick up everybody else in the household who couldn't demonstrate that they had lawful status. We saw an increase in workplace raids. We saw enforcement actions in or near so-called sensitive locations. There's been a longstanding policy that ICE will not arrest people for immigration violations in certain locations like churches, schools, medical clinics, at political demonstrations. And we saw ICE under the Trump administration making some arrests in those locations. And so all of this had the effect of really creating a lot of fear and confusion for all non-citizens, including individuals with lawful permanent residence or even naturalized U.S. citizens. The administration was also pursuing denaturalization against certain naturalized citizens. So I think a sense that nobody was really safe from potential immigration enforcement. And then I think it had a real chilling effect on the activities, the participation of non-citizens and even mixed status families with citizens and non-citizens in the household, really impacted their participation in the economy, in social institutions, and in communities. For example, folks, and this is anecdotal, but I know there is like sociological research bearing this out. Folks were less likely to access routine and preventive health care and more likely to wait until they needed to go to the emergency room, more likely to try to find work in the informal sector as opposed to working without documentation, which creates a greater risk of abuse or exploitation if you're not working in a formal job. We're less likely to report abuse and victimization to law enforcement. There were studies that picked up a decline in reporting in certain jurisdictions. I'm not sure about here locally. Less likely to utilize the state court system. So that could mean not appearing on a traffic violation, but also potentially choosing not to file for a domestic violence protection order when you really need one. And also less likely to apply for immigration benefits for which they might qualify. The benefits granting agency, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, was really also weaponized. There was a policy where if your benefit application was denied, certain types of benefits applications, you would be referred to ICE for deportation proceedings. So that caused people to be afraid to seek the status that they were eligible for.
Thank you, Anna. And so we're bumping up against the time to wrap up, but I have one more question for Captain Christensen. Yes, I'm sorry. So it sounds like even though you are like doing your darndest to keep everyone safe and communicate that out, it sounds like there's still fear is rampant, even in a community like Omaha. So when you come to, well, you say that you wear a suit most of the time, but but when your department arrives to a scene of a crime and there's immigrant victims, what steps does OPD take to kind of overcome the fear and distrust that pervades?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, what I would say is we don't start any citizen contacts with, are you here legally or not? Just that doesn't happen. So I would like to think that we treat everybody equally. It's very difficult for us because if you know anything about the history of policing in the United States, we've had some pretty bad experiences with law enforcement in the community and not that long ago. But now imagine that you're not even from this country and you're not used to local laws of having to park in between lines and, you know, on the street or something like that. Or my own experiences coming from a country where it's okay to physically assault your wife because she's your property. Obviously, that's contradictory to the laws here in Omaha, Nebraska. But we don't treat anybody differently because of status, because again, we don't ask status. It's just not something we really get into unless somehow it's volunteered or something like that. So when I give the next part of my answer, I am speaking on somewhat generalities, but the Omaha Police Department has really strived under the leadership of Chief Schmatter to increase community relations. And this is not something that happens overnight. Chief Schmatter's been in office for 12 years now. We try and be extremely transparent with the communities, not just in South Omaha, but the entire, you know, Omaha metro community as a whole. Even when it's not convenient for us to be transparent, we've had 2 pretty high-profile officer-involved incidents over the last 60 days. We didn't hide behind anything. One of my jobs is to run the officer-involved investigations team, so I'm in charge of that team. There were some tough days and tough nights. The department's small enough to where we all know each other. We don't I can't say that we're all friends and we go out, but I mean, we know each other. But you know, facts are facts, and we didn't shy away from those facts, even though it would have been convenient for us to just sit there and say, well, we're going to wait for the grand jury, or we don't have a comment. No, we put the facts out there. So I think the transparency really helps with the community. But first and foremost, I think when dealing with anybody, we don't want to be seen as the enemy. You know, one of the things that we always laugh about as police officers is when we see, you know, families in public and a parent tells their child, if you don't shape up, I'm going to tell the cop. Well, we don't want kids to be afraid of us. We would rather them, you know, interact with us. Because at the end of the day, much like the people we interact with, we're all human. Yes, we wear a uniform, and yes, we have a badge, but I think we all, you know, bleed the same color blood, and so, you know, we really want that transparency and that trust, and it's something that you have to really fight to establish, and then fight to nurture and foster over time. It doesn't happen overnight, and you know, we have to earn trust every day. We earn trust with every citizen contact we have, not just with immigrants and minority communities, but with literally every citizen contact we have. So.
Thank you. That's a really great way to end our panel. Thank you, Captain, Ruby, and Anna. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And now I'll hand it over to Inclusive Communities, who will review the breakout group agreements.
To get the resources that a lot of citizens are allowed. I think we also talked about how the police doesn't really, I guess, enforce the federal laws, but we were kind of wondering how it works when somebody's being questioned and they need to provide information. You know, if somebody gives something, then, oh, what's your name? And, you know, do you have identification, or what are the other ways they have to, you know, prove that they have some sort of understanding of what's happening. And so we were kind of wondering what would happen in that situation. And I think people have the right to be scared because there's just so many factors that are working against immigrants in this country. I think we help in a lot of ways, but I don't think the payout is really worth it sometimes. And so it's just a very nuanced conversation. There's so many things that need to happen, but that was pretty much it.
Thank you so much. And if there is some time at the end, we can take a few questions. So hopefully we can get back to that. Thank you. Yep.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, we talked about at our table. First, just the same thing that sounds like everybody else talked about is like the difference between what happens in a police interaction, and then we went to like what happens when you get to jail. So I think what the captain said is that like officers will not, generally don't ask those questions there, but if someone's being investigated or arrested for a crime and they go through the jail doors, that is a completely separate thing from OPD, and most law enforcement don't run jails, or it's a separate entity or whatever. And then those, once you get fingerprinted, kind of all that stuff comes out on top, because you could have a warrant in another county that officer didn't know about, that officer didn't ask about, but once you got in jail, then yeah, that's what that is. So we started off talking about that and how that kind of fear affects interactions. And one of our members talked about an interaction that they had with the person who just really didn't want the cops to be called, and kind of what maybe they were thinking in that interaction, either them not having insurance, why they didn't have insurance. Maybe they thought that getting insurance would get like a paper trail to them. Or just not wanting to have the police come because of fear of those questions being asked from an immigration status standpoint. And so another of our members also talks about how hard it is to navigate the immigration system to become a citizen. When does it start? How do you go through things? And also that the fact that there will be an interview where they don't know if any of those, maybe what we would see as citizens, benign interactions with police when a parking ticket comes up, like, well, why weren't you following our laws? becomes something a little bit bigger than for somebody who's trying to get status than what we would feel, because we don't have to go through those interactions. And then just going into what inclusive community does and what we're trying to do is kind of open it up, that communication, and try to stem some of those and quell some of those fears on both sides. I likened it to, like, if I went to another country, would I feel the same way that people coming to our country would feel about being wary about breaking laws that I didn't know about and how it might other me because I wanted to protect my family. And then we just, at the end, just kind of went to the other sides of the conversation when it came to jobs and like having federal money go to non-citizens when American citizens are not given the same opportunities. Just another side of the conversation we didn't get too far into, but it is a part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. A couple more tables in the room. Thank you. And then I'll come over here.
Hi, my name is Lydia. So for our group, we talked about how the country specifically is still polarized when it comes to immigration specifically, and how specifically there is not a lot of understanding on both ends, and that is that struggle. And we really connected with Ruby talking about the parking situation specifically, just because it shows how there's not really a bridge to really understand on both ends, and how it's really important for both ends to find people, to have people to like communicate with each other. So just to close that polarization and not have immigrants who are just struggling to go in, but actually have people who are open to welcoming them and having them getting introduced to the nation. So we just mainly talked about how the struggles of immigration and how it's really hard, and how this conversation is super important to highlight the struggles of how immigrants, and how even me and our own experience, and how we face those struggles in this nation specifically. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And our last in the room group, and then we'll go to our group online.
Thank you guys for having us. We spoke about the effect pretty much of immigration. Our table has a wealth of personal experience dealing with immigration as a whole. Some of us are first generation immigrants, some of us are second generation immigrants, and there are some of us that are around immigrants on a daily basis, and to witness some of the struggles that they go through. Now, we spoke about a little bit about the policies that affect them. But what was interesting in this conversation is that when I was speaking to Scott, Scott mentioned that he went to Turkey, and it was in reverse of how we treat immigrants, those who immigrated to this country, how we treat them. He said that when he was over there, he barely went, what was it, 2 blocks away. Right, and it was just, it seemed like he was being harassed every time that he left his hotel room. They have the same policy. So what it was it's not, in all fairness, this wasn't just being a U.S. thing initially. It could be a global thing. And what I took that back to is the attitude towards immigration when the policy shift had changed in 2017, which Ms. Deal had mentioned. And it went global from that point as far as the attitude towards immigration and the protection of the borders. It became a little bit more tense and a little bit more, a lot more about that country and the expulsion or the prohibition of migrants or immigrants entering into the country to live there. So, you was 22 at the time? Or was that, but no, but what I'm saying is when the policy started shifting, it took many years to get there, but when it got there, we seen it globally because it started with this right here. So, the point being is that, overall, it was a great discussion, and I would like to thank those who are here, who have managed to get their citizenship. Uh, Thank you for contributing to our country. Thank you for being a part of our country, and uh, that's it.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you to this conversation at this table. I think we have one group online that is going to share out. Jennifer will unmute you and we'll hear from you.
Hi, my name's Taylor. I'm calling from the computer. Hi. So our group didn't necessarily have a whole lot of personal experience regarding immigration laws. My brother does have a wife who is South African, and they are currently not together right now because she is working really hard to get her visa to be able to come to the United States. So parts of the conversation from the panelists that really did play a part in our conversation at our table was really about this fear that surrounds immigrants who are maybe experiencing a crime or wanting to report a crime, but also feeling fear in regards to opening themselves up to when they report that crime. So we discussed that a little bit. There was some experience where there was lots of witnessing of prejudice within immigrant communities by police, by law officials in that. Now, we don't, of course, there's no saying as to what those scenarios were. But that was a big topic of our conversation, was the dual fighting that we have on both sides, that there's the law officials wanting to do what's right in their communities by upholding the law, and then these people who are members of the community who are maybe scared to help support that ideology for good reason in certain situations.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for the folks online. Thank you. I know we have just about a little over 10 minutes left, and that's not a lot of time to wrap up, but I do want to give just a moment, if we can, to the question that was in the room earlier, because there may not be a lot of time for someone to ask someone from the police department this question. So if you want to ask that question again, I think you have a microphone up there.
So it's part of a two-parter. So the first part is like, when the police are called on a scene, how do you kind of address people in the situation of not wanting to report? You say that we don't really ask for somebody's status or any papers, but what happens when it goes beyond, oh, I saw something and I wanted to say something? And then the other part of the question is, how do you foster a relationship with the immigration community to show them that there's nothing to be afraid of? Because you can tell us in this room that we don't do those things, we don't ask those questions, and then not expect us as immigrants to not be afraid of the police. So I guess it's, what steps does their department go through to ensure that there is that relationship between us and them, to show that it's okay to kind of report these things and to not be afraid?
Sure, both good questions. You might have to remind me of the second one, because when I get talking, I forget my own thoughts. But so to the first question, I think you asked something about how do we deal with people who don't want to speak to us or that are afraid of us. First and foremost, when we show up on, and it's hard without having a specific type of incident. Obviously, if there's weapons or violence involved, we have to put safety at the forefront of that. And sometimes we don't always have the ability when there's a time-sensitive safety threat to make sure that, you know, we have the time to meet with people and connect like we wish we would have, because there's obviously a safety threat. But I think in your first question, you asked about like in an interview room setting, if we were interviewing somebody, we have department interpreters, we have interpreters that we can call through a language line. I haven't ran into a language yet where we weren't able to accommodate that. But as far as personal rights, immigrants have the same rights as any other citizen. So if they're accused of a crime and they're in custody, they're still going to be read their Miranda warning. We have them in Spanish. If in doubt, we just won't, if we can't communicate, we probably just won't question them. I mean, because obviously the reason we're questioning them is to try and communicate. So those are just kind of a couple examples, I would say, but the rights of the individual, it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or not, you still have all the rights afforded to you under the United States Constitution. So remind me of the second question, because again, I got going.
It's something like, how do you connect with a community to demonstrate that it's not an unsafe relationship to connect with the
Yeah,
police?
you know, it's hard. I think, you know, we're doing it right now, you know, in a small group setting. We have a lot of programs. Our police athletics for community engagement, totally free for kids to go play, you know, community sports, be it baseball, soccer, flag football in the winter. But really, it's something where, in my opinion, you don't just have events and group settings. It's something you do and you live every day with every interaction. You can sit and hold events all you want, but is there the genuine connection? Maybe, maybe not. But I think our actions speak louder than our words most of the time. So if we can show that we're being genuine and that we do care about each other, I think that's what really speaks more than maybe words.
Thank you so much. I want to hand it back to Astrid and the panel for any final thoughts or wrap up before we close out for the evening.
I don't have anything further. Ruby, Anna, do you have anything? We're good.
One last question, quick.
Okay, my question is about the fingerprinting. Once a person's fingerprints go in, if they're innocent or whatever they were picked up for was, you know, they're not the right person, do your fingerprints ever get taken out of the database?
With respect to like the Secure Communities program and the sharing of those fingerprints with the FBI and then with the feds or with ICE, I don't believe so. I don't know if you have any further insight. Explode a database pretty easily? Yeah, I mean, I think innocence of the alleged like state crime, right, is not really of interest to ICE if they're pursuing immigration enforcement. So if somebody's prints are in ICE's system because they were previously apprehended at the border or deported, ICE is going to be interested in knowing that that person has been picked up by local law enforcement, regardless of whether they're ultimately charged with a crime, which is part of what makes the program problematic, I think, right? But it's definitely widespread, and I haven't heard any indication that it's going anywhere or being successfully challenged. So I think it is one of the main information sharing mechanisms that will probably continue to exist.
Thank you.